students. For this module, we're going to be talking about Aristotle and his virtue ethics. We're going to focus a lot on the theoretical background, his argument, and also we're going to learn a little bit about induction and deduction, given Aristotle's different forms of reasoning. So you're going to, by the end of this module, be able to explain and assess Aristotle's function argument, to explain and apply correctly Aristotle's rule of the golden mean, to explain and assess Aristotle's reasoning on courage and being good-tempered, explain and identify deductive and inductive reasoning, and a particular form of reasoning called argument from elimination. So here we have Aristotle. And again, I'm going to treat him like a role-playing character in a role-playing game. He's born 384, lived till 322, ripe old age. One of the reasons he lived to a ripe old age is he abandoned Athens when they were interested in trying him for impiety. He said he didn't want Athens to sin twice against philosophy by killing him as well as they killed Socrates. His class would be as a sage druid. The reason for this is he's a polymath, meaning he's extremely good at many different intellectual skills and extremely knowledgeable in many different intellectual fields. He was born in Stagira, Greece, so he's often called the Stagirite. He invented most of the disciplines of that we right now think about when we think about, say, a college education. So, so he contributed greatly, though did not invent philosophy. He did invent logic. He invented aesthetics, zoology, or we can think of biology in general as a field of study. He wrote on physics, political science, metaphysics, psychology, or philosophy of mind. He wrote on philosophy of language, and the invention of logic. I cannot just sort of walk past that as quickly as I did. He invented categorical reasoning and forms that he could discern were valid or invalid. And also he even invented metalogic, or the foundations for logical theory at all. Now, he contributed to ethics as well. His virtue ethics, now taken down the Nicomachean Ethics, which is a book that again, he never wrote anything. He would just talk and walk. He was a peripatetic philosopher. So peripatetic meaning talk and walk. That's how he worked with his students. And so his students' notes are how we have any of his knowledge. And by the way, we don't have all of the things he lectured on, unfortunately. Maybe one day they will uncover them in some ruins and we'll be able to see more of what Aristotle thought. But we're going to be focused on his virtue ethics, and in particular his rule of the golden mean. Now, he wasn't all that awesome. He did make at least one terrible logical fallacy, which I'm not even going to get into, but some inductive fallacies as well. He looked into his wife's mouth, saw less teeth than he saw in his own mouth, and thought that women were lesser developed versions of men. So yay sexism. Also supported slavery. He's very aristocratic in his values. So that would be his claim to shame. Again, we said he's accused of impiety and he ran. His motto, we could say, is we become just by doing just acts. So this is often, if I'm doing this for the stats for the different philosophers, I'll have an image of where they grew up if I could find one. And this is an image from Stagira. So courage 0, let's call it as it lays, wisdom +3 and logic +3. What I failed to mention is, okay, so let me give you a little bio of Aristotle. So he's born up in what is now Greece, but was Macedonia. His father is the physicians to the king or to the court, okay? So he's extremely well connected. They sent him down to study at the academy, at Plato's academy, when he's 17. and he's there for many, many years. He's expecting to become the next head of the academy, and instead, when Plato dies, it goes to the nephew, who's less deserving. This prompts Aristotle to bolt Athens, and he goes over to the islands of Lesbos in that area, and he marries the town leader's daughter or something like that. Anyway, they end up having kids. He stays happily married. But he starts studying on the docks, like the fish and the shark and the whale, whatever is brought in. He starts studying. And by dissecting them, he's trying to figure out what's internal to them and what makes them different. And this is how he invents what we now conceptualize as zoology, but he thought of as blood-borne versus non-blood-borne, what we would think of as invertebrates versus vertebrates. So Aristotle is not just good at thinking deductively, but he's also incredibly good at observing the natural world, categorizing it, reasoning about those categories, okay, and coming up with brand new ways of thinking about or comprehending the world. So we're going to focus on the Nicomachean Ethics. In this, he is discussing the question of what is it to live well, use them, okay? So what is a good life? What is it to be a good person? Now we can conceptualize this. First, I'm gonna repeat what Socrates thinks. It's weird that people spend a lot of time focusing on having a good car. Sorry, anachronistically, sorry, but how about it? Having a good horse, okay, having a good house, okay, having a good, all these different things, material things, creating nice things, like if you're a painter, creating a beautiful painting. But people don't think about their life in such a conceptualization, and Aristotle and the Greeks think that they should. Okay, so what is it to be a good person? Well, a person who's living a good life, that good life must not be only instrumentally valuable. Okay, so it must not be what is dependent on fortune. Okay, so how do I explain this? It must be intrinsically valuable. It must be worthy in and of itself, as itself, something to be honored. Okay, it cannot be worthy because of another goal. Okay, so if I ask you, why are you going to college? And your answer is, well, I'm going to college because I want a job. Then for you, college is instrumentally valuable, not intrinsically. It's valuable only because it gives you access to something else. If you could go directly to job, you would go directly to job. Okay, so so the good life must be intrinsically valuable. It cannot be merely instrumental. The reason for this is that instrumental, as soon as it's attached to another external goal, it's not independent of fortune. It's dependent on fortune for that goal to be met. Okay. Ideally, a good life is not bound to the vicissitudes of fortune. Okay. It's going to be steady and straight and good no matter what happens in the external world. Again, we don't want it to be dependent on externalities because that's less stable. So it also will not be contingent on others. Okay, so it's not dependent on others to figure out if it's going well or not. It must be in accordance with man's nature. It has to be like man. You can't ask a person to live an ideal life. Okay, you can only ask a person to live a good life, one that's in accordance with you, with a person as a rational animal. Okay, that's Aristotle's definition of man is rational animal. The rationality part is the part that we're going to look at here for how to live a good life. So he is both a scientist and a philosopher. so he both is like an armchair philosopher. Is well, he probably doesn't sit on his butt, but but he walks around the agora, walks around the dock, thinking and also observing. Okay. So he is an inductive reasoner, and inductive reasoning has to do with inferences that preserve truth probably or probabilistically, meaning if the premises are true, the conclusion is likely to be the case, but not necessarily the case. Okay. Inductive reasoning, we find this when we are observing nature and coming to conclusions about it, when we are noting differentiating features, and when we're giving probabilistic support. So that's what induction is probabilistic reasoning. Almost all scientific reasoning is inductive. Okay, if we want to know about climate change, we go study the ocean and the temperatures and the effects on the sea urchins. Okay, but we're going to go out in the world and we're going to go study the different patterns and figure out, note differentiations between them to be able to figure out what's going on. As I mentioned before, we know what it is to be a good, say, sculptor, but what is it to be a good man? In this, Aristotle's method of analysis I really like, and we don't probably in philosophy talk about it enough. What he does is he'll start with an idea, okay, that he wants to ponder, and he'll bring up what ordinary people think. So this is what most people say or think. Then he'll say, this is what sages think, this is what experts in the field or intellectuals who discuss this talk about, okay? And then he brings up what the main concepts are and gives different examples, and then gets into the puzzles, the things about this concept that people argue about or wonder about, or things that he comes up with to wonder or argue about. So that's the way he analyzes. And he'll do the same thing when he's conceptualizing virtue ethics. So for, say, for courage, he'll talk about that as a virtue. He'll say, well, this is what most people think. This is what the sages think. And here are some particular puzzles about it. Let's start with the function argument part one, which is very similar to inductive reasoning. Okay. He's going to look around the world. He's going to try to figure out what is the proper function of man. In other words, if we can figure out what it is that a man does, then we can figure out what it is a man does well. Okay. So first he looks around the world and he's going to say, well, the first level of life is plants. And if we're going to say that it's a good plant, what we mean is that it does plant well. So how do you do plant well? Well, it can get access to nutrients and the necessities of life it needs, sorry. It grows, okay, and it reproduces well. So access to the means to grow and reproduce well and to sustain its existence, that's the proper function of a plant. Now, the next level up, okay, for creatures, and we're thinking about this as what we call the scale of nature, which is it's been adapted in later conceptions, but originally this does come from Aristotle's idea, the scale of nature. Okay, so first, right, we have rocks down here. They don't have any sentience or absorption of minerals, that type of things. Okay, so we don't think about them as reproducing. Okay. So first we have plants, then next we're going to have animals. For the proper function of an animal, it has to get access to nutrients and necessities to grow and to reproduce well, but it also has to perceive well. It has locomotion, meaning it can move around its location, unlike a plant. And it has some social and reasoning capacities, given the different types of animals. So we're getting much farther along. Now, the only thing we're going to add in for human is, again, the difference between us and all the other animals is rationality. So the proper function of a human, again, this is going to sound bad when I'm describing it first as like plant-like, get nutrients, get its necessities. Next, grow well, reproduce well, perceive well, locomote well, use social and reasoning capacities well, in particular, use reasoning to standards of human excellence in reasoning, that is truth preservation in reasoning, and that's rationality. So if we look at this just inductively, we observe the different ways that being that type of being is accomplished well, then we can say, look, a human ideally should live in accordance with reason, and that means in accordance with virtue. The second part of the function argument is more deductive, okay? So deductive arguments are arguments where the premises are meant to support the conclusion necessarily, meaning in every single case. Now, I'm going to stop for a second and just say, the reason it works like this is because deduction works on the laws of language, much like math works on the laws of math, okay? So just as 2 + 2 will always equal 4, P implies Q, given P implies Q. So in other words, if P then Q, and you know P is true, then you know Q is true as well. So that's an example of a deductive form of reasoning. And what it does is if the premises are true, that contains all the information we need to know that the conclusion is true as well in a valid form of reasoning. So there's one subtype called argument from elimination, and this offers a set of alternatives, and it's deductive, the form, so we're assuming these are all in every possible alternative, okay? And it eliminates one by one each of the alternatives, and then it leaves the last one as the one that must be the case. So the form that it would have would be something like either something P or Q or R or S. It's not P, it's not Q, it's not R, it must be S. Conclusion S. Now, to be clear, this is the deductively valid form of reasoning. If this is exhaustive of alternatives, P or Q or R or S, and it's not P and Q and R and S, then it has to be, or sorry, if it's not P and not Q and not R, to be very precise, then it has to be S. So this is a valid form of reasoning because it's deductive, but it's going to be applied in a particular way. And of course, to assess this, you have to ask, is this really should be a deductive reasoning argument? So here we go. Here's part 2. So here we got our possibilities of a good life. Okay, we've got the life of pleasure, of sensual gratification. We've got the life of money making. We've got the life of honor, and we've got the life of virtue. Okay, so these are the 4 things. These are our P, Q, R, and S. Okay, that he offers up, that when you ask people what a good life would be, or you ask the sages what a good life would be, this is the answer they give. And I want you to take a moment for just reflect upon this for a second. When asked what the good life is now, thousands of years later, is this still the same 4 alternatives that people think are good? The life of pure pleasure, the life of the wealthy, the life of the honored or the celebrity life, or the life of pure virtue. So first, he's gonna do this as an argument from elimination. And again, he wants to keep this distinction. There's an important distinction between man and all other animals, which is our rationality. Okay, so we can obey rules that our community sets, and we can live within those community rules. By the way, Aristotle later in his political theory mentions that man is the most moral animal that exists within community, but outside of community, he is the least moral animal. So for him, living bound to communal rules and being able to be corrected and correct oneself, that level of rationality is only found in humans. Okay, so first, let's talk about the life of pure sensual gratification. So living in the sunlight, going to the beach to swim, drinking good drinks, eating good food. Sounds pretty good, right? The problem for Aristotle is this is fit for the beasts. In other words, he thinks that you're describing a cow's life, okay? Just be in the field, hang out with your friends, and cows do have friends. Hang out with your friends, chew your cud. For him, this is fit for beasts, not for humans. Next, what about the life of money making? He says, like, this is only instrumentally valuable. Okay. And also, it's the life of profit. So you have to live by the rules of profit, not the rules of friendship, which would be the good life. Okay. Meaning that if you're just always trying to make money, you're not going to be trying to make these other crucial aspects of your life, your sociability, your pleasure orientedness, your ability to do honorable things. You aren't going to be focused on that. You're only going to be focused on your own greed. This is only as valuable as the money is as well. Money can become less valuable. Governments fall, things happen. Therefore, it's not necessarily valuable in and of itself. It's valuable independently on many other things. What about the life of honor? Here he says, okay, pretty noble contention for the prize of the good life, being honorable. But he says, look, it's not being honorable that's being honored. These are two separate things, okay? So you can live an incredibly honorable life and never be honored, okay? Or the other way around, you can be honored and lead an incredibly dishonorable life, okay? So there's a disconnect between being worthy of honor and being actually honored. To be actually honored, that requires an externality. Therefore, it's not as good as something which is only intrinsic, that's dependent only upon yourself, not upon all others in your community. And therefore, if it's not the life of pure pleasure or the life of money making or the life of honor, it must be the life of virtue. So life of rational virtue equals a good life, according to Aristotle. It is what makes life desirable and lacking in nothing, as he says. Next, he's going to bring up how to get to the good life. Okay, and his whole Nicomachean Ethics is set up in this really amazing way, where he talks about the theory background. Let's look at the foundations, what we truly value, right? What is a good life? How do I live well? Then he's going to work you through these different virtues. We're going to focus on the moral virtues and only a few of them. Okay, but he also has intellectual virtues. And then he's going to go into friendship at the end. The idea here is that if you live a good life and you follow this rule of the golden mean and you work on each of your virtues, okay, you can develop yourself into the kind of person that is worthy and will have true friendships. So the goal of living well is also being able to accrue true friends and to be able to give to them all the goodness within you. So his moral principle, the rule of the golden mean, the idea here is that moral virtue is a mean, okay, so it's the middle between two vices. One involves excess and one involves deficiency. One should aim at what is intermediate, the middle road between these vices, okay? So let's say that it's truth and talk about yourself, okay? If you are too excessive in the way you talk about yourself, we would consider that boastful, and that's not good. If you're too deficient in the way you talk about yourself, it sounds like you're putting yourself down, self-deprecation, and that's not good. So honesty about oneself would be the best path. So that gives you an example of the rule of the golden mean. One should aim at the middle between the two vices. So his virtue ethics focuses on two main things. You're either controlling your behavior, okay, as a human, or you're controlling your feeling. So either external, your behavior, how you act upon and in the world, okay, and internal, how you feel and habitually, and how you control how you feel habitually. Moral virtues must be, one, voluntary. They have to be chosen for the person for the sake of the good. So in other words, I have to choose to be, say, generous. I have to know it's a generous act, okay? I have to choose it because it's generous in order for me to be generous. So it's got to be voluntary, chosen to be good. It has to be habitual. A moral virtue has to be a fixed nature of a person. This is the person, okay, conceptualize this. You know people this well, okay? You, your ride fell through at the airport and you're stuck there and you need a ride home. Who would you call? Who would be reliable? Okay, that's a fixed nature of a person. Who could you count on if you're stuck in a jam? That person comes through reliably. I want you to think of how different virtues come through reliably. Some people are courageous reliably. Some people are kind reliably. Okay. So that's the fixed nature of that person. That's the way they behave when given an opportunity. It has to be growth oriented, okay, or formative. So the idea here is that when one is looking within at one's ways of behaving or ways of feeling, one has to aim for something better, for becoming better, for growth in particular areas. Aristotle's virtue ethics admits that virtue is relative to the skills and capacities of the person. He gives the example of, so in the gymnasium, you can imagine a trainer trying to feed Milo the Wrestler, who's the biggest guy who ever lived, okay, versus a gymnast. For this analogy he gives, the idea here is that the trainer isn't going to give them the same amount of food, okay? He's going to give Milo the Wrestler the proper portion for him, and he's going to give the gymnast the proper portion for him. So the difference between them is what they need and what capacity they have. Okay, in this case for their appetite. So virtue is like that. You wouldn't expect I don't know, Sunday school teacher to behave in the same level of courage given a dramatic event as you would a person who's trained by the military. Okay, each one of them has different capacities for acting that are dependent upon how they have developed as a person. Humans have natural passions. People are angry, people are lustful, people are many different ways that in contemporary society they might be considered viceful. Aristotle does not have a concept of humans that requires them to be ideal. He wants them, he conceptualizes them as natural beings, and we have to respect them as natural beings. Humans are animals. They want to reproduce. They want to eat well. They want to do these natural things, and we shouldn't think about that as bad. Instead, if somebody were not lustful, for example, Aristotle would think there's something wrong with his appetite. Okay, if somebody is not angry, he thinks there's something wrong with that person's spirit. So anger isn't necessarily always wrong, okay? And lustfulness isn't necessarily always right, but these are aspects of being human and being animals. Some actions and passions are excessive, and there's no good ways of behaving. I'm going to read you a quote from him, and this is, I think, part of his dry wit. But not every action nor every passion admits of a mean, for some have names that already imply badness. For example, spite, shamelessness, envy, and in the case of actions, adultery, theft, murder. One cannot commit adultery with the right woman at the right time and in the right way, but simply to do any of them is to go wrong. Okay, so after reflections, what have you practiced to become skilled at? And what should people practice to be better at being human, social, rational creatures of habit? Okay, so the goal for the rule of the golden mean, right? We're going to try to find the thing, the virtue in between the two vices. Here are some of his examples. Okay, so we have cowardice, which is the deficiency of bravery, and we have recklessness, which is the excess of bravery. So if you're courageous, to lack courage is to be cowardly, but to embrace danger in a way that's not rational as a human is to behave either rashly or recklessly. Generosity is the mean virtue, but it's mean in between lacking generosity, which we have many words for, including stinginess, okay? Or on the other hand, being extravagant or wastefully generous. Okay, so we don't want too much and we don't want too little, so we want just right, which is generous. Next, we have in conversation. Aristotle, who's known for his wit, requires that you be at least entertaining to the people you're talking to. Okay, so if you are too jokey, right, you're a buffoon, you're a clown. Or if you're doing it at the wrong place or in the wrong time or to the wrong person, that would be buffoonish, meaning clownish. If, on the other hand, you have no wit at all, you'd be a bore. So wittiness is the central virtue, moral virtue here. Next, we have, I went backwards. There we go. We have friendliness, okay? And lacking friendliness, we have lots of words for that, including grouchy, okay, or irritable. But you can also be overly friendly, like sycophantic, like brown-nosing, okay? Now, I want you to match the virtue to its focus. Is this about controlling one's sociability, controlling one's behavior and conversation, controlling one's giving of money or gifts, or controlling one's fear or overconfidence? Okay, so now we're going to focus, we're going to drill in on very specific parts of his theory by looking at his definitions and his claims, in this case about courage. It is the mean in the realm of having feelings of confidence and controlling fear. Having too little confidence is cowardice. Having excessive confidence is recklessness or rashness. To be virtuous, one finds the middle way and feels the right amount of trepidation, directed at appropriate things at the right time for the right duration and in the right manner. Rash men are precipitate and wish for dangers beforehand, but draw back when they are in them. While brave men are keen in the moment of action, but quiet beforehand. Okay, so that's his definition for courage. Is being properly courageous, given his definition, a necessary moral virtue? Meaning, is someone who is not properly courageous not a moral person? Why or why not? Explain your reasoning. Okay, I'm going to use another scholar to introduce the next reflection. This scholar holds that Aristotle thinks that anger is caused by the appearance of injustice, and to fail to defend oneself or one's family or dependents would be shameful. Anger is therefore a legitimate and indeed required response to injustice and its demand for retribution, something which must be reflected in the laws of the city. Okay, so do me a favor, go read the Nicomachean Ethics just on anger. Okay, just read that on anger and assess his moral reasoning on the virtue of being well-tempered or controlling feelings of anger.